The shooting range was a place where pride and skill went hand in hand, and where anyone could prove themselves or be laughed off the field. For Sarah, it was the latter. She had been here countless times before, but this time it was different. This time she was facing a group of strangers, men whose laughter echoed across the range like the shots they fired. Their words were sharp, cutting through the still air. "She really thinks she can hit a bullseye?" One of them chuckled. "I've seen better shots from a kid with a Nerf gun." Sarah swallowed her nerves, her palms clammy against the cool metal of the gun. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not this kind. These men, these strangers, were already making judgments about her. They didn't know her, didn't understand the quiet determination that had brought her here. She stood still at the line, her hands shaking ever so slightly as she gripped the gun. She had been practicing for weeks, training her body and mind, but in the face of their ridicule, everything seemed to falter. The weight of their laughter made it hard to focus. She closed her eyes for a moment, just long enough to shut them out. The noises on the range became muffled, like they were coming from far away. She thought about the reason she was here, the reason she had pushed herself so hard to be good enough. It wasn't about proving herself to them. It was about proving to herself that she could do it, that she wasn't just someone to be laughed at or dismissed. The pressure of their eyes, the heaviness of their mocking words, was nothing compared to the weight of her own doubts. Opening her eyes, she set her sights on the target down the range, though her hands were still shaky. She breathed in deeply, holding the air in her lungs as she slowly exhaled, trying to steady herself. She could do this. The first shot came quickly, almost instinctively. The gun fired with a loud crack that echoed across the range, but it missed. A clean miss. The laughter that followed was louder than before. "Nice try," one man called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Better luck next time." Her heart pounded harder as she reset herself. She had to ignore them. She had to stay focused. The second shot came. Another miss. This time, the laughter was joined by some low murmurs of disbelief. A few of the men exchanged glances, their eyes filled with mock pity. "Maybe you should stick to something safer," one of them suggested, his voice condescending. The third shot, still off target. The fourth, another miss. By now, Sarah's entire body was tense, her muscles sore from holding the gun too tightly, from the pressure of trying to be perfect. She could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their judgment sinking into her skin. She wanted to shrink away, to drop the gun and run, but no, she had come too far. She had fought too hard to turn back now. She set her feet firm again, adjusting her stance. The gun felt heavy in her hand, but it was a familiar weight. She'd practiced with it at the range for hours, but she had never been so aware of how it felt before. With another deep breath, she tried again. The fifth shot. This time, there was no laughter, just a loud crack, followed by a tense silence. She lowered the gun and glanced toward the target. Had it hit? She couldn't see it from where she stood, but she could feel something shift in the air. There was no mocking now. The men were quiet, their eyes locked on her, waiting for something. She couldn't be sure, but she felt something, a strange confidence that had never been there before. Her breath caught in her throat as she raised the gun again. Her mind raced, every doubt she'd ever had flashing before her eyes. She had to prove something to herself, but now she also wanted to prove something to them. She was tired of being underestimated, tired of being written off before she even had the chance to try. Without thinking, she took aim again. This time, feeling the strength of her muscles move fluidly, without hesitation. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The sixth shot rang out, and for the first time she didn't hear the laughter. She slowly turned her head, her pulse racing. There was no immediate reaction. The seventh shot. She aimed, she fired, the gun kicked. Back in her hands, but this time it felt almost instinctual, and then there it was. The eighth shot hit. The crowd was still silent, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder if they were starting to believe. Was this really happening? Was she really doing it? Her hands were steady now. The first few shots had shaken her, but with each new one, her confidence had built. She wasn't the nervous girl they had thought her to be. She was something else now, something they didn't expect. The ninth shot. The sound of the bullet striking the target was crisp, sharp, and final. She couldn't see the mark from where she stood, but she didn't need to. She could feel it. The silence around her was so thick it pressed against her chest. She couldn't help herself. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. But she wasn't done yet. The final shot. Her hands were still steady as she raised the gun one last time. The world around her seemed to blur, and for a moment, all that mattered was the target. She couldn't see it, not fully. But she didn't need to. She had trained herself for this, and now she was trusting herself completely. She fired. The shot echoed in the stillness, and then silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The crowd around her was still. The men who had laughed, who had doubted, who had judged her, they were staring wide-eyed, as if they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The sound of their disbelief was almost louder than the shot itself. Finally, one of them stepped forward, his face pale. Did you really just—" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. She was still trying to process what had just happened herself. The adrenaline was still coursing through her veins, and her mind was racing. Had she really done it? Had she really hit every single target? She lowered the gun, her arms feeling like jelly. Her legs were shaky, her breathing uneven. The air seemed heavy, thick with expectation. A few of the men came closer, their expressions now a mix of awe and disbelief. "That's impossible," one muttered. "Yeah," another added, shaking his head. That's something else." Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had done it. She had shocked them all, but more importantly, she had shocked herself. In that moment, she realized something. This wasn't just about proving a point to them. This was about proving that no one, not even the harshest critics, could ever define her. The challenge wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The murmurs around her began to rise like a tide. Sarah stood frozen, her arms still trembling. From the effort of keeping the gun steady, she didn't know how to respond to the men who had once laughed at her. She wasn't sure if she even cared anymore. All she could think about was the shot, the last one, the one that had shocked everyone, including herself. Her pulse was still racing and her thoughts were scattered. How had she done it? 10 perfect shots, every single one a bullseye. She couldn't remember ever feeling like this before. It was as if everything in her body had clicked into place in that instant. The gun, the target, the men watching her. It all felt surreal. A man's voice broke the silence. "That's impossible," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. He was the first to speak, his face pale as he stared at her, still in shock. Another man stepped forward, his hands on his hips, his mouth hanging open in astonishment. "I've been coming to this range for years. I've never seen anyone shoot like that." Sarah said nothing. She didn't have to. The last shot had spoken for her. But the words that followed made her uncomfortable. They were not the words of admiration she had hoped for. They were words of suspicion, of curiosity. "How'd you do it?" The question came from behind her, a voice full of wonder, tinged with a doubt. Sarah turned her head slightly to see who had spoken. It was the man who had mocked her the most, the one who had laughed the loudest when she first arrived. His eyes were wide now, not with ridicule, but with something else, something that made her skin crawl. "I don't know," she answered truthfully. She really didn't. Bullseye after bullseye. Without even looking at the target, he pressed, a note of disbelief in his voice. "I just aimed and shot," Sarah said, her voice quiet, almost uncertain. She was still trying to understand it herself. The whole thing felt like a dream. The man shook his head slowly, his face a mixture of awe and skepticism. "You're telling me you didn't cheat? The word hung in the air like a challenge. Cheat? It sounded absurd, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized how unbelievable it must have seemed. How could anyone hit a target without even looking, without any prior experience? "Of course I didn't cheat," Sarah replied, her voice sharper now. She was getting defensive. She couldn't explain what had happened, but she knew it wasn't some trick. It was real. The man didn't look convinced. "I've been in the military," he said, almost as if to defend his expertise. "You can't just close your eyes and hit the bullseye every time." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew he was right, but the reality was that she had just done it. There was no explanation, no rational reason for what had happened, and yet there it was. The evidence was undeniable. A few of the other men had gathered around her now, there, eyes fixed on her, not with the same mocking amusement from earlier, but with a different kind of intensity. They were searching for answers, but they weren't going to find any. Not from her, anyway. Her hands still shook as she lowered the gun, placing it back on the table in front of her. Her thoughts were racing. The adrenaline from the shot was starting to wear off, but a lingering sense of unease remained. What had just happened? Why had she been able to do something that defied all logic? "Can you do it again?" The man who had first questioned her asked. His tone was no longer dismissive. It was serious. Sarah looked at him, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't sure she wanted to prove herself any further. What if it didn't happen again? What if she missed? She had never been one to seek attention or validation from anyone, but now she felt like she was being backed into a corner. "I don't think I should," she replied, her voice low. She wasn't afraid of the challenge. She was afraid of what would happen if she failed. The pressure was already weighing on her, but the man wasn't ready to back down. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Why not? You've already done it once. Why not prove that it wasn't a fluke?" The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, and it ignited something inside of her. The same feeling she'd had when she first walked up to the line earlier, when she'd stepped up to prove them wrong. She had no idea how she had done it, but she couldn't back down now. "All right," she said finally, her voice steadying. "I'll do it again." The man smirked, clearly thinking he had won. The others around her exchanged glances, murmuring amongst themselves. Sarah felt all eyes on her as she picked up the gun again, her fingers tight around the handle. This time, she was determined to remain calm. She closed her eyes once more, willing herself to focus. She could hear the faint sounds of the men talking behind her, but she shut them out, just as she had before. She aimed, or at least she thought. She did. She fired. The shot rang out, but this time Sarah didn't feel that same confidence. She opened her eyes to see the target, her stomach sinking as she saw the hole just outside the bullseye. "Not bad," the man who had questioned her said, though there was no hint of amusement in his voice. "But not perfect either." Sarah's heart raced as she lowered the gun, disappointment crashing over her. It had been so close. She hadn't hit the bullseye this time, and it stung more than she expected. She had set the bar so high with her first set of shots, and now she had failed. But something was different this time. She didn't feel the weight of the mocking laughter anymore. The group was still silent, their eyes focused on her, but there was no more ridicule, only curiosity. "Nice try," the man said with a nod, his tone softer now. But then something unexpected happened. "You've got something special," he added. "I've never seen anyone shoot like that before. It's like you were connected to the target." The words hung in the air, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Connected to the target. What did he mean by that? The men around her began to murmur again, this time with a tone of admiration rather than mockery. Sarah could sense the shift in their attitudes. They were no longer questioning her ability. They were intrigued. They wanted to know more. But She didn't have answers to give them, not yet. She turned away, her mind still spinning. The shot may not have been perfect, but she had proven something to herself. She had stepped into the unknown, faced the challenge head-on, and come out on the other side with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. She couldn't ignore what had happened. Something was shifting inside of her. Something had clicked, and whatever it wasn't finished yet. As she walked away from the range, she felt the eyes of the men on her. But this time, she didn't feel the sting of judgment. She felt curiosity, and that was far worse. Sarah walked away from the shooting range that day, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The men who had once mocked her were no longer laughing. Instead, they were watching her, waiting for something more. Their curiosity had shifted into something deeper, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Her hands still tingled from the grip of the gun, her fingers sore from the pressure. She had never felt anything like this before. The sense of power mixed with confusion. How had she done it? Why had she been able to hit the bullseye every time, only to falter when the challenge was put to her again? She had done it once, without even thinking. But now the pressure of expectation was suffocating. How could she recreate something? She didn't understand. The days that followed were a blur. Sarah tried to go back to her normal life, but the nagging question of that day at the range lingered. Each time she closed her eyes, she could still see the target, the way the bullet had flown so effortlessly into the center. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside of her. But what? She found herself returning to the range more and more, hoping for some answer, some sign that she could replicate the feat. But the shots never came the same. Each time she fired, it was either off-center or worse. A complete miss. The easy confidence she had once felt was gone, replaced by a rising sense of doubt. She had tried it all, the breathing exercises, the focus, the mental preparation. But nothing worked. It was like the magic had faded, leaving only frustration and confusion in its wake. One afternoon, after another failed attempt, Sarah sat down on the bench by the range, feeling utterly defeated. She hadn't even realized how much time had passed until she saw the shadows of the late afternoon stretching long across the ground. Her head hung low, her eyes fixed on the gun in her hands. "What's wrong?" Sarah looked up, startled. Standing before her was the man who had questioned her the most at the range, the same one who had pressed her to prove herself again. His expression was no longer one of mockery, but of genuine concern. I'm trying," she said, her voice tight with frustration, "but it's not the same. I don't understand what happened that day. It was like something clicked, and now I can't do it again." The man sat down beside her, his eyes not leaving her face. "You know, you've got something rare. What you did wasn't just luck, I can tell. But it's like it's hiding from you now, like it's waiting for you to figure it out." Sarah blinked, taken aback. She wasn't used to people speaking to her like this, like she was special. It made her feel uneasy, as though they were placing an expectation on her that she couldn't meet. "Do you think I'm some kind of freak show?" she asked bitterly, her voice sharp with the exhaustion of trying and failing. He shook his head, his expression serious. "No, I think you've got something inside of you that you don't fully understand. Maybe no one does." There was something about his tone that made her pause. He wasn't just speaking from curiosity. There was an underlying tone of something deeper, something hidden. She could sense it, but she didn't know how to respond. "What are you saying?" she asked slowly, her voice full of doubt. He glanced around as if to make sure no one else was listening before he spoke again. "I think there's more to you than just some lucky shot. You've got a gift, Sarah, and I'm guessing you've got no idea how to handle it." Sarah looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "A gift?" she repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. "You're saying this is a gift? "I think it is," he said, his voice soft but firm, "and I think you should try to find out what it is, because I don't think you've even scratched the surface." His words echoed in her mind as she made her way home that night. A gift. The thought was so foreign, so impossible. What gift could she have? She had never thought of herself as special, never believed in anything beyond her own limitations. And now here she was, being told she had something powerful. But what was it? Her thoughts were clouded as she entered her apartment, the walls closing in around her. It had been hours since she left the range, but her mind was still racing. The feeling of the gun in her hands, the precision of the shots, the way they had just happened, it felt almost supernatural, but that wasn't possible, was it? People didn't just suddenly develop talents out of nowhere. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. It didn't make sense. But the man's words lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her. That night, she dreamed of the range. The sound of the gunshot, the smell of gunpowder in the air, the feeling of the gun's kickback in her hands. But this time, the target wasn't a piece of paper with a painted bullseye. It was something else, something darker. She could see shadows moving just beyond the target, just beyond her reach. A voice whispered her name, but when she turned to look, there was no one there. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind was racing, but there were no answers, just more questions. The dream had felt real, almost like a warning, but what was it trying to tell her? The next day, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had followed her from the dream. She returned to the range, but this time something felt different. The air was thick with tension, as if the place itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She picked up the gun, her fingers brushing the cold metal. She hesitated, her heart pounding. What was she waiting for? What was it that she needed to do? She tried to clear her mind, to focus, but the shadows from her dream crept in at the edges of her thoughts, blocking her focus. And then she felt. A tingling sensation ran up her spine, as if something was pulling at her from within. She closed her eyes, trying to ignore the growing pressure in her chest, the sense of something about to break loose. The gun fired. But this time, something was different. The sound was sharper, clearer, almost like it had resonated through her very bones. She opened her eyes, and the target was gone. The range had disappeared. Instead, she was standing in the middle of a forest, the trees looming over her there, twisted branches casting long, dark shadows on the ground. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and she could hear something rustling in the underbrush. Her heart pounded in her chest, but this time there was no fear, only a deep sense of purpose. She couldn't explain it, but she knew. She had to follow the path ahead. Someone was waiting for her. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps as she stood in the middle of the forest, the cool, damp air surrounding her like a blanket. The trees towered overhead, their gnarled branches casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every movement. The rustling in the underbrush had stopped, but something else, something far darker, seemed to be closing in around her. Her hands still gripped the gun, the metal cool against her palm, but the weight of it felt different now. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a key to something unknown. She shook her head, trying to push away the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. Was this some kind of hallucination? The shooting range had disappeared, and in its place the forest had emerged, impossibly real. The air smelled like moss and earth, the sound of birds distant in the trees, but none of it made sense. She took a step forward, feeling the crunch of dry leaves beneath her boots, the feeling that had overtaken her before, like something inside of her had awakened was still there. A strange sense of power and purpose gnawed at her, but it was accompanied by an equal sense of fear. What was happening to her? As she moved deeper into the forest, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Every snap of a twig underfoot seemed to echo louder than it should, and she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Something, or someone, was nearby. The whispers from her dream returned, distant at first, then louder, closer, until they were almost deafening. They were calling her name, but the voice was distorted, unfamiliar. Sarah. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. The voice was different this time, low, guttural, almost as if it was coming from the earth itself. Sarah, you must follow. The command was clear, but its meaning was anything but. She hesitated, unsure of what to do, but something urged her to move. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, to run, but she knew she couldn't. She wasn't sure why, but the same force that had driven her to shoot at the range was now propelling her forward, deeper into the forest. Another step, then another. The trees seemed to grow darker as she went, the shadows lengthening in strange, unnatural ways. The air grew heavier, more oppressive. She felt as though the entire forest was alive, watching her every move, waiting for her to make a mistake. And then in the distance she saw it, a clearing. The trees parted, revealing a strange stone structure at its center. It was old, crumbling, its surface covered in vines and moss. It looked out of place here, like an artifact from another time, another world. She stepped closer, her feet moving almost of their own accord. The whispers had faded, but the compulsion to reach the structure remained, as if something, someone, was waiting for her there. As she neared the entrance, her eyes fixed on the carvings etched into the stone. They were intricate, cryptic, and ancient. They seemed to shimmer in the dim light, almost alive in their movement. And at the center of the carvings, a single symbol stood out, one that she recognized from her dream: a bullseye. The symbol seemed to pulse with an energy she couldn't explain, a force that seemed to reach out and pull at her very soul. And moved before she could stop it, and she touched the stone. The moment her fingers made contact, a shock ran through her entire body, and the world around her seemed to twist. The forest, the clearing, the stone, everything blurred, like an old photograph fading into nothingness. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble. She stumbled back, gasping for air. Her vision blurred, her head spinning as though she were falling through a vortex. She tried to take a step forward but couldn't. She was frozen, trapped in this strange, shifting space. And then, in the chaos, a figure appeared. It was a man, tall, shrouded in shadows, his face hidden. His presence was overwhelming, suffocating. He spoke, his voice deep and otherworldly, yet strangely familiar. "Sarah, you have awakened what was hidden." She could hardly breathe. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man stepped forward, the shadows swirling around him like a cloak. "I am the keeper of the truth," he said, "and you, Sarah, are the key to unlocking it." The words were heavy, laden with meaning. But Sarah couldn't understand. She didn't know what he was talking about. I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to know how I shot, how I hit the bullseye, that's all." The man tilted his head slightly as if considering her words. "It is more than just a shot, Sarah. It is your legacy. The power that lies within you is not of your own making. It was passed down from those before you." Sarah blinked in confusion. "Passed down? What do you mean?" The man's gaze softened, and for a moment his features seemed to flicker, as if the shadows were fighting to maintain their hold on him. "Your gift is not unique, but it has been dormant, hidden, until now. The bullseye, it is not merely a symbol of precision, it is a mark of those who were chosen, those who can see, feel, and act with a clarity that others cannot. It is the legacy of the sight." The words hit Sarah like a wave. She felt dizzy, her knees nearly giving out beneath her. The sight! What is that? What are you talking about? The man stepped closer, his presence pressing in on her. The sight is the ability to perceive what lies beneath the surface, to see things others cannot, to sense the threads that bind the world together. It is the gift of those who can change fate, who can shape reality. Sarah stumbled back, her mind reeling. But I'm not special. I don't have anything like that. You do, the man said. You have always had it. But it has been dormant, lying in wait until the time was right, until you were ready. Sarah's head was spinning. She couldn't process everything he was saying. It was too much, too impossible. She was just an ordinary woman, no different from anyone else. She had never been chosen for anything. She had never felt like she had a special purpose. And yet, the events of the past few days seemed to be pulling her into something far bigger than she could ever have imagined. The shots at the range, the strange sensation that had overwhelmed her, and now this man who claimed she had a gift, a legacy, a destiny. Why me? She whispered, her voice cracking. Why am I the one who has this gift? The man's eyes darkened, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw something else in him, something ancient, almost sorrowful. Because you are the last of those who can see, the last who can wield the sight. The others have disappeared, their gifts lost to time. But you are the final thread, and you must decide whether to embrace your legacy or let it slip away. The ground beneath her. Feet trembled again, and Sarah's knees buckled. She had to steady herself against the stone. The weight of the decision, the responsibility that had just been thrust upon her, was unbearable. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, the words barely audible. The man nodded, his face softening. "You don't have to decide now, Sarah. But know this, whatever you choose, it will change everything." The world around her shifted again, the forest fading, the clearing dissolving into nothingness. The end.